Salams from the People's Dispatch studios in New Delhi. I'm Siddhantani. You're watching Daily Debrief. On the show today, we have the latest on the Ukraine crisis. We talk about why Israel is refusing to cooperate with the UN Human Rights Inquiry and a tragic end to Kamila Valieva's Winter Olympics. First up, the crisis in Ukraine continues as the US persists with its messaging, talking of an imminent Russian invasion of its western neighbor. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has agreed to meet his Russian counterpart next week, Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, that is. A meeting he says will be called off if there is indeed an invasion by Russian forces. Prabir, it's almost the end of another week. The narrative has not changed one bit. What is your current analysis of what's happening?
You know, we are in a very interesting situation where the United States and its key, flag waver, United Kingdom, are both saying that there is an imminent invasion, it's not taking place because we are exposing it. Now, this is what's called a non-falsifiable proposition, what Karl Popper said is not science, and which one of the AP reporters, when confronted with this kind of evidence of imminent invasion, said this is Alex Jones territory, that this is really, you're not giving me any evidence. He said, I just gave it to you. We said, you made a statement, you didn't give it. Didn't give any evidence. So we are continuously hearing this stream of stories. It started, if I remember correctly, with the United Kingdom saying they have information that a false flag event will be taking place and that will be used for an invasion. And that story has come back again and again in different forms. Now, the problem with all of this is that this has caused the Ukrainian economy to sink. And even the airlines, Indian Airlines, for instance, is not having its flights to Ukraine because the insurance rates have really shot up. They don't want another MH17 replay in which an aircraft goes down, and not only the airlines, but the insurance companies have to foot the bill. So given all of this, the Ukrainian economy is tanking. More this fear is ratcheted up. Now, Zelensky is there in Ukraine, still in Kiev, and most of the embassies have shifted out or have left. So I don't know what their game is. Their game is that either they won a victory because the invasion has not taken place, which was perhaps never scheduled to be there, and therefore they can claim victory. And if they can somehow foment a real attack, fight by, say, the Ukrainian forces or the mercenaries which are there. And let's face it, now we have enough evidence to show that Azov battalion is there, there are other mercenaries who are there. There is also evidence that, for instance, the Canadians have trained some of neo-Nazis. So all of these are really loose cannons. And any of them can lead to an incident of firing Donbas region. There are forces over there who are fighting for regional autonomy, autonomy within Ukraine. They're firing back. Is that one of the exchanges that took place yesterday or day before yesterday, which Ukraine claimed destroyed a kindergarten school? Fortunately, they haven't claimed children were inside that. So given all of that, the problem that is there is that this continuous ratcheting up of pressure can lead really to an incident which can go out of hand. That's one thread that is there. The other part of it, they have been continuously saying that Russia is bringing troops. Russia has said, yes, we were doing certain military exercises. We know they were doing military exercises in the Black Sea. Number of ships they used, 6. Number of ships last year, the NATO used
5 times.
30. Okay, so these are not major issues. Yes, of course, countries do exercises. NATO does exercises in the Baltics next to St. Petersburg, you know, not too far away from that, so 100, 125 kilometers, 50 kilometers from there. So these are things, if the United States or NATO wants this to be controlled so that it does not lead to this kind of tension, the solution is to talk it over. And that's what Putin and the Russians have been saying. Discuss it, your exercises, your expansion of NATO, your missile batteries. Now, all of it, finally, the United States has been willing to talk. In fact, its letter that it writes does say that we are willing to talk about our missile batteries, we are willing to talk about our exercises, we are willing to talk about the NATO troops. all of this we are willing to talk.
Right.
What it is not open to discussion is the ability for us, NATO, to take on any country and make it a NATO member, which at the moment really is about two countries. One of it is Ukraine, the other is Georgia. The Georgian issue is more or less over with the war that took place earlier. So I don't think that's really on the cards. NATO, Zelensky has said, not perhaps in our lifetime. So I think that issue is also over. And therefore, yes, there is more ground for trying and sorting it out. And Ukraine's issues going back to the Minsk agreement and the Normandy format, which means France, Germany, Ukraine and Russia, along with the Donbas region leaders, sitting down and discussing what the regional autonomy should be. That's very unpopular among the neo-Nazi groups in Ukraine, who have a lot of firepower, who have been boosted by a lot of tacit support from the NATO countries, and who therefore may actually have the Ukrainian government over a barrel.
Right.
Because if they have the street power, they have the military power, they may not have the people, but they have that. If that force is utilized, then Zelensky may not be able to negotiate a regional autonomy for the Donbas region, which is what Russia has said they will guarantee, and that's what the Minsk agreement had also reached that point. Yes, this would be done. The mechanics of it will be discussed. So that, what happens to that is of course the key question as far as Ukraine is concerned, and the future of Ukraine, which is a multinational, multilinguistic state. So I think that if that discussion is left to Russia and Ukraine and France and Germany, because they have the most at stake. After all, Russia supplies Western Europe with gas, and it's a key fuel for Germany, as well as other European countries. I think that would lead to a solution of some kind. NATO discussions with the United States regarding military forces, batteries, and so on, and military exercises, future of Ukraine with Ukraine. I think if it moves in that direction, we have hope for peace. Whether this will be allowed to happen.
So this next round of talks between Lavrov and Blinken, that now the Russians have proposed a date and Blinken has said that he's accepted it, of course, if that invasion doesn't happen. Some of this likely to be on the table?
You know, the question is, these things are always on the table. The issue is that it has always been clouded by the fear of war taking place next week. You know, every week it's next week. Thank God it has now moved to next week. Otherwise it was next day. So this is one improvement. Now we have a gap of 7 days. But nevertheless, if this does take place, we can have two-track negotiations. One, the future of NATO, military exercises, military bases, positioning of troops, etc., including Russian troops and Russian military batteries, for instance. So that also has been raised by the United States, and the other about future of Ukraine. And European countries coming into the negotiations, which till date had been left virtually for the United States to set the agenda on their behalf. Will that take place? Something we have to see. Seems to be going in the right direction, very slowly. And can somebody clear the pitch? Yes, number of players are there who can clear the pitch, including possibly the Donbas region leaders who may not agree to any kind of reasonable solution. They might say we want virtual independence. So all of that we'll have to see where it goes.
Complex scenario. Thanks so much for that update, Prabir. Moving on now, Israel has formally said yesterday that it will not cooperate with a special commission established by the UN Human Rights Council to investigate alleged abuses committed against Palestinians. In a letter sent to Navi Pillay, the South African judge who is heading the commission and is a former UN Human Rights Commissioner, said that she is biased against the state of Israel and therefore so is the commission. I spoke earlier to People's Dispatch's Abdul, who covers the region. Abdul, first up, what exactly is the mandate of the Human Rights Council Commission of Inquiry, and in this specific case, what are they investigating?
As we all know, last year in May, for 11 days, Israel consistently bombed Gaza. During that bombing, more than 250 Palestinians died and around 2,000 Palestinians were injured. And there was a massive destruction of the civilian infrastructure in Gaza, which is one of the most densely populated areas in the world.
Right.
So basically, during those attacks were basically created a buzz in international politics, which led ultimately to the United Nations Human Rights Council to meet in an emergency meeting, and in that a resolution was passed. According to that resolution, a permanent inquiry was set up, which basically the mandate was to inquire not only the violations, the human rights violations or the possible war crimes during these 11 days committed by Israel, but also to basically to broaden the horizon and to include all the Palestinian territories, occupied Palestinian territories, including the East Jerusalem, and see all the actors, how they have behaved and whether they have violated human rights and committed any war crime. So it is a comprehensive, the mandate is quite comprehensive, includes all the actors involved in those in that conflict. Right. And it also broadens not only 11 days, but 2 months. Apart from that, there is another additional mandate, which basically makes the commission's work more comprehensive. It also had to look the systematic violations or discriminations which has prolonged the Israel-Palestine conflict. It means it is not limited to those 11 days or 2 months. It is basically a broad investigation of occupation, Israeli occupation in last almost 70 years. So how and their policies, what we generally call apartheid, and so on and so forth. So all whether they are discriminatory and all. So it basically, the mandate is quite broad. Yeah.
All right, fair enough. For a bit of background, Abdul, for those of us who are not very familiar, what exactly is the UN Human Rights Council, and what's its relationship been specifically in this case with Israel?
Basically, it is a UN body which specifically looks at human rights. Basically, the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the mandate of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and other international conventions post 1948 signed. So it basically looks whether the countries are observing their commitments in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and other international treaties, right, respecting people's human rights or not. All the countries, of course, every occasionally the Human Rights Commission meets, and there is a briefing of each and every member of the United Nations, whether they are following these conventions or not, whether they are respecting the human rights or not. Israel has been the one country which is a member of the United Nations, but whenever it has come to basically owning the problems and it has refused to do it. Even in International Criminal Court, which decided to basically investigate Israel's human rights violations in Palestine and in Israel last year, Israel refused to cooperate. It has consistently, basically, whenever there is an international inquiry to establish it, it has refused to cooperate. And if the international groups, if the United Nations Human Rights Commission comes up with a report, Israel thoroughly rejects it, saying that we have not participated and hence it is not legitimate. So basically, it is a way of basically keeping away from its commitments to international human rights as a member of the United Nations, which it cannot do. We all know, because of the nature of the Israeli state, because of the occupation, because of the peculiar circumstances in which the Zionism works. So and it can go, it can basically work with impunity, primarily because the permanent member like United States backs it. Yeah. So basically, this is a completely complete impunity with which Israel is operating in international politics, which basically does not go well for all the UN bodies and the human right institutions. Yeah.
All right. Thanks so much for that, Abdul. A deeply unfortunate story rounds up our show for today. Kamila Valieva, the 15-year-old favorite to win the women's figure skating gold at the ongoing Beijing Olympic Winter Games, ended her campaign in disappointment. Having set several world records in the short time since she made her senior debut that is, in October of last year, she led the field after Tuesday's short program. But a series of falls and messy landings on Thursday ruled her out of a podium finish. Valieva is, of course, facing doping allegations, as we've reported before on the show, and has been under tremendous pressure after the IOC allowed her to compete when she received interim relief from the Court of Arbitration for Sport. I spoke earlier to senior journalist Sharda Ugra about the pressure, both mental and physical, endured by elite athletes, and in this case, an elite athlete who is also just a child.
Uh, Siddhant, what happened with Kamila Valieva, I think it is just a manifestation of everything that should not have happened, given that there is so much more awareness about mental health. And there is a sensitivity towards, particularly towards athletes, elite athletes, and towards young people in general. And we just saw everything come to a sort of a ghastly end, given the way she performed in her individual final, and everything else again that went around it. That there was she was being censured by her coaches. So you're thinking, this is a 15-year-old. I have a niece who's going to be 14, and I would not want her to put her through something like this. There was one of the other athletes that was there, the Russian girls who didn't get the perfect score. She said, I don't want to be on ice. And, we heard all those things. It's happened to high performing athletes. It's happened to experienced athletes. So, I mean, what a 15-year-old child is going through at a time like this, and where the adults are, it was just quite terrifying and quite sad and very, very sad.
Yeah. Shada, if I may ask you at a slightly broader level, uh, what is organized or what are organizations such as the IOC? Of course, all of these sports are governed by governing bodies, all of whom claim to consider the athlete's best interests as their first priority and everything else comes after. So, what are some of these organizations doing in attempts to make sure that this kind of pressure, this time, of course, the pressure being even compounded by the whole doping thing that's going on? So, what is being done to address what is clearly an important issue?
It's quite ironic, Siddhant, that it's happened at this time, because just before Tokyo, I think a couple of months it may have been, that the IOC put out this handbook about mental health and the importance of it. And it's a very detailed and a very carefully thought through document. And it tells you, it's almost like a handbook on how to look out for signs, how to look out for what an athlete is going through, and when do you reach the level to sort of check it right at a very early stage, so that the athlete is not required to get medical help or like a medical intervention. And the prime focus on all this is the entourage. What they call the entourage is everybody who's around that athlete, which is the coaches, the officials, even her parents, friends, family, and her, say, maybe school teachers and so on. And, so there is this thing that's there. And when Simone Biles basically stepped out of, she stepped off or stepped away from major competitions, she herself, and she's just an incredible gymnast in her own right. She's so well feted, recognized, rewarded, and such a confident athlete. She literally went through this phase where had it been, say, 10 years ago, I don't think she would have had the confidence to even say it, in public. So I think with all the information that's coming out, there is a sense that, yes, athletes can talk about it. It's okay not to be it's okay not to be the best in the world if you're not feeling up to it on the day. Simone Biles used the phrase called twisties, which is probably something like this, which happened to Valieva in the final last night. This morning, I've lost sort of track in that sense. But so you're looking at it and saying that, look, that people are doing all the right things by the book, as in all the rule book is in place, the handbook is in place. Why are things like this happening? Because the pressure from everyone around, from that entourage, from the Russian Olympic system, or whatever it is, from her coaches, was so big that they thought nothing of throwing her under the bus virtually, So it's quite awful. I think as adults, adults have a lot to answer for what's happening in the world of very, very young elite athletes, developing athletes that are just starting out.
Yeah, and I think in Valeva's case, I think the adults around her have much to answer for. As like you rightly pointed out, so many of those cases we've heard of all the horror stories that U.S. gymnastics went through, and how much of that was because of the coaching staff and other adults who were present in that. But thanks very much, Shraddha. I think that's all we have time for today. Always a pleasure to have you on Daily Debrief. Hopefully, one of these days we'll get you on to talk about something positive that sport is bringing to the table instead of all of this that's going on. Thanks so much. That's all we have on this Friday episode of Daily Debrief. From me and the entire People's Dispatch team, thanks very much for watching. For more on all of these stories, please visit our website, peoplesdispatch.org, and also give us a follow on the regular social media platforms. We'll be back again tomorrow. Until then, goodbye.